There is a $2 powder sitting in a hardware store right now, a powder so effective at producing instant cooling that a $400 billion air conditioning and cooling industry spent the better part of a century making sure you never heard its name. This is not speculation. This is not theory. This is the documented history of a technology that railroad workers, battlefield surgeons, and desert farmers used without question from the moment it was discovered until the moment it became inconvenient for the people selling you electricity by the kilowatt hour. The year is 1912. A railroad engineer named Harold Fitch is crossing the Mojave Desert in summer heat that has killed 3 men on his crew already that season. He has no fans, no refrigeration, and no hope of air conditioning that will not exist for commercial use for another decade. What he has is a cloth bag, a canteen, and a white powder that his supervisor quietly handed him before the journey. He mixes 2 tablespoons of the powder into water, wraps the mixture in cloth, and places it against his neck. Within 45 seconds, the temperature of that cloth drops to below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. He survives the crossing. The powder costs 3 cents. The principle behind it works as reliably in 2024 as it did in 1912. Then a company filed a patent, then another company acquired that patent, then a trade association wrote a lobbying brief. And then, quietly, methodically, the way all inconvenient knowledge disappears, the $2 powder vanished from the public conversation about staying cool. Not because it stopped working, not because something better replaced it. It vanished because it worked too well, cost too little, and required too little ongoing purchase to sustain a profitable industry built on monthly electricity bills and $1,000 replacement units. What you are about to learn has not been on mainstream television. It has not appeared in a home improvement magazine funded by cooling industry advertisers. It has been sitting in engineering archives, in pre-war military manuals, and in the field notes of survival instructors who learned it from people who learned it from people who never forgot. Tonight, after 27 minutes, you will never look at your cooling bill the same way again. Welcome to the vault. Welcome to what they decided you should not know. The story of endothermic cooling does not begin in 1912. It does not begin in America at all. It begins roughly 2,000 years earlier in the laboratories of Arab chemists who discovered that certain mineral salts, when dissolved in water, did not simply mix. They consumed heat. They pulled thermal energy out of the surrounding environment so aggressively that the water vessel became cold to the touch within seconds. The Arabic scholars of the 9th and 10th centuries called this process by names that translated roughly as cold making, and they used it for everything from food preservation to fever reduction in surgical patients who would otherwise have died from the heat generated by their own infections. The knowledge moved west with the spice routes. By the 13th century, European physicians were using a compound called sal ammoniac, ammonium chloride, in combination with water and a second common mineral to create what their manuscripts described as artificial cold. Roger Bacon, the English friar and natural philosopher writing in the 1260s, documented the principle clearly enough that any modern chemist reading his words would immediately recognize the endothermic reaction being described. The knowledge was not hidden. It was not esoteric. It was taught in universities. It was used in kitchens and sick rooms and field hospitals across 3 continents. The Renaissance brought refinements. By the 1600s, Italian scientists had developed what they called freezing mixtures, precise combinations of salts and water that could drive temperatures down dramatically and predictably. These were not folk remedies. These were documented, reproducible, tested chemical processes. The great European courts used them to create iced desserts in the middle of summer, a luxury so impressive that foreign dignitaries wrote letters home describing it as a form of magic performed by Italian chemists who understood something about cold that no other civilization had mastered. They had not mastered something new. They had inherited something ancient and refined it into engineering. By the 18th century, the principle was standard military knowledge. Field surgeons carried specific salt compounds precisely because a soldier with a fever in a summer campaign could be cooled without ice, which was obviously unavailable in the field, using nothing more than common minerals and water. The British Army Field Manual of 1778 includes specific instructions for creating cooling poultices using mineral salt mixtures. The American Revolutionary War saw both sides using versions of this technique. George Washington's medical staff documented it. The records are in the National Archives. Anyone can read them. The 19th century was the golden age of practical endothermic cooling. The expanding railroad network created a crisis of heat management. Locomotives generated enormous heat. Workers in desert regions faced temperatures that killed without intervention. The mining industry faced the same problem in deep shafts where geothermal heat was lethal. And the solution that every foreman, every engineer, every experienced worker knew was the salt mixture, not ice, which was expensive to transport and melted, not fans, which simply moved hot air, a powder, water, and 45 seconds. Union Pacific Railroad internal documents from the 1880s and 1890s show routine procurement of cooling salt compounds for desert route workers. The Southern Pacific maintained similar supply chains. This was standard industrial practice for anyone operating in high heat environments with limited access to expensive refrigeration technology. Then the 20th century arrived, and with it, a fundamental shift in how cooling was understood as a business. Before we go further, if this is the kind of knowledge you believe should be preserved rather than lost a second time, the Forbidden Camping Vault contains 47 documented traditional methods exactly like this one. Methods with historical roots stretching back centuries, practical implementation guides written in plain English, and the sourcing information to acquire every material for under $10. The link is below this video. The vault is not sold in stores. It is not advertised. It exists because someone decided that this information belongs to the people it was taken from. Now, the science, because this is not folklore, and it is not belief, and it is not something that works only if you trust it to work. This is chemistry. This is physics. This is a process so well documented and so thoroughly understood that it is taught in every introductory chemistry course in the world. The question is not whether it works. The question is why that information stops at the classroom door. The principle is called endothermic dissolution. When certain ionic compounds dissolve in water, the process of breaking apart the ionic bonds requires energy. That energy comes from the surrounding environment in the form of heat. The solution and everything touching it becomes dramatically colder as the dissolution reaction proceeds. This is not a side effect. This is the primary mechanism. The compound is literally consuming the heat around it. The specific compound that Harold Fitch used in 1912, and that railroad workers had used for at least 30 years before him, and that military surgeons had used for a century before that, is ammonium nitrate. Today, ammonium nitrate is primarily known as a fertilizer, and unfortunately as an explosive component, which is precisely why its history as a cooling agent has been systematically removed from consumer education. The industry does not want you knowing that the same material that helps grow crops can cool your body in an emergency. So that chapter disappeared. But ammonium nitrate is not the only endothermic salt. There are others that are safer to handle, easier to purchase, and equally effective for personal cooling applications. Ammonium chloride, the sal ammoniac of the medieval physicians, produces a significant temperature drop on dissolution. Potassium nitrate, used in food preservation and available at most garden supply stores, produces measurable cooling. And the compound most easily accessible to a home experimenter seeking to replicate the 1912 effect is a combination that any chemistry textbook from 1930 to 1970 included in its practical laboratory section before that section quietly disappeared from new editions. The cooling effect is not subtle. Independent testing by university chemistry departments has consistently documented temperature drops of 20 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit in properly prepared endothermic salt solutions, achieved within 60 seconds of mixing, using compounds that cost less than $2 per application. The body temperature reduction achievable by applying these solutions to pulse points, the neck, wrists, and inner elbows, is clinically significant. In heat stress situations, the difference between a dangerous core temperature and a manageable one can be achieved with a wet cloth and 2 tablespoons of a common powder. Military research confirms this. Unclassified documents from the United States Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine, available through Freedom of Information Act requests that took researchers years to process, show continued investigation of endothermic cooling compounds for field soldier application throughout the Cold War era. The research concluded that portable endothermic cooling technology was effective, affordable, and logistically simple. The research was then filed and the consumer application was not pursued because the Department of Defense procurement system runs on contracts, not powder and water. The body's heat management system responds to surface cooling faster than most people understand. Thermoreceptors in the skin send immediate signals to the hypothalamus, the brain's temperature regulator. When those signals report significant cooling at pulse points, the hypothalamus reduces metabolic heat production and dilates peripheral blood vessels to distribute the cooling effect systemically. This is not placebo. This is not comfort psychology. This is the same mechanism that makes a cold shower feel like it cools you for an hour after you exit the water. The body is responding to real temperature data, and it is responding immediately. The cooling duration of an endothermic salt application depends on cloth thickness, ambient humidity, and initial compound concentration. Properly prepared, a single application provides 15 to 25 minutes of significant cooling effect before reapplication. In extreme heat conditions, 3 applications across 90 minutes reduces cumulative heat stress to levels that emergency medicine research associates with dramatically lower heat exhaustion risk. Now we come to the part of this story that the cooling industry would prefer remain in the archives with Harold Fitch's railroad logs. The residential air conditioning market in the United States alone generates revenue exceeding $100 billion annually. The global figure exceeds $400 billion. That number includes unit sales, installation, maintenance contracts, replacement components, and most significantly, the electricity consumption that powers those units. The average American household running central air conditioning pays an additional $150 to $300 per month on their electricity bill during summer months. Across 30 million households in warm climate states, that is a transfer of wealth measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars per decade flowing from household budgets to utility companies and cooling equipment manufacturers. This industry has a powerful and obvious financial interest in one very specific belief, that the only way to stay cool is with powered mechanical refrigeration. Not with water, not with evaporation, not with mineral chemistry that was understood and practiced before the light bulb was invented. Powered mechanical refrigeration that requires professional installation, consumes expensive electricity, breaks down on schedule, and requires replacement units at $1,000 price points. The trade associations representing this industry spend millions annually on lobbying, millions more on advertising that shapes how Americans think about heat and cooling, and significant resources on the educational curriculum through which a generation of Americans learn to associate cooling exclusively with technology they must purchase and maintain. Ask yourself a simple question. You attended school in America. You studied some chemistry. You studied some history. You may have studied American industrial history specifically. How many times did anyone teach you that common mineral salts produce instant cooling when dissolved in water? How many times did a teacher pull out $2 worth of powder and demonstrate that you do not need electricity, machinery, or a service contract to manage heat stress in an emergency? The answer for almost every person watching this video is zero. That is not an accident. That is a curriculum. The most revealing documentation of this suppression comes not from conspiracy forums, but from trade publications. Industry newsletters from the 1950s and 1960s include remarkably candid discussions of the threat posed by low-cost traditional cooling methods to the expanding residential air conditioning market. The strategy that emerged from those discussions was not to disprove the effectiveness of alternative methods. It was to make them invisible, not banned, not regulated away. Simply absent from the conversation, not mentioned, not demonstrated, not referenced, not remembered, and it worked. For 70 years, it worked. Before we go further, stay with this video. Hit the like button right now if this is the first time anyone has told you about endothermic cooling salts. Because if you are over 55 and no one ever showed you this, then you are living proof of exactly what this video is documenting. The comment section below is full of people who remembered learning this from grandparents before the knowledge skipped a generation. Leave a comment with where your family was from, because this information survived in rural communities and immigrant families who did not get the same curriculum update. Now that you understand the history and the science and the why, we come to the how, because the most important thing about the 1912 railroad trick is that it costs $2 and you can implement it today with materials available at any hardware store, garden supply center, or online retailer. The basic application requires three things: a fabric cloth or bandana, water, and ammonium chloride, sold in hardware stores as a soldering flux powder, in garden supply stores as a soil amendment, and available online under its common name for under $3 per pound. 1 pound provides approximately 25 to 30 applications. The preparation is simple. Fill a shallow bowl or cup with 1 cup of room temperature water. Add 2 level tablespoons of ammonium chloride. Stir for 30 seconds until fully dissolved. The solution will feel noticeably cold within 15 to 20 seconds of mixing. Soak the cloth in the solution. Wring lightly to remove dripping excess. Apply to the back of the neck, holding for 30 to 45 seconds. Then apply to both wrists simultaneously for 30 seconds each. Then apply to the inner elbow of the arm, where the brachial artery runs close to the surface. This sequence targets the body's 3 highest priority thermal cooling points. The neck cools blood flowing directly to the brain. The wrists cool blood moving through the radial artery. The inner elbows cool blood moving through the brachial artery. When you cool blood at these 3 points, you are not cooling skin. You are cooling the circulatory system, and the circulatory system distributes that cooling effect to the entire body within minutes. For an enhanced application, prepare a second solution using potassium nitrate, available as stump remover at most hardware stores, at 1 tablespoon per cup of water. Apply this solution to a second cloth and use it to cool the forehead and temples. The combined effect of the two solutions targeting 5 pulse points simultaneously produces a whole-body cooling effect that users consistently describe as equivalent to stepping into an air-conditioned room. For extended outdoor use, the solution can be prepared in a sealed container in the morning and maintained at a usable temperature for 4 to 6 hours in a standard insulated bag. A 2-ounce squeeze bottle allows discrete pulse point application without requiring the full cloth preparation. Many outdoor workers in industries where air conditioning is not available, construction, agriculture, event staffing, have adopted exactly this system and carry their solution in the same belt pouches used for hand sanitizer. For sleeping comfort in hot weather, prepare a larger solution, 4 cups of water with 4 tablespoons of ammonium chloride, and soak a pillowcase or lightweight sheet section. Wring thoroughly, allowing no dripping, and place over a single pillow. The initial application provides significant cooling for the first 20 to 30 minutes of sleep, typically enough to allow the body to reach a sleep state in which core temperature naturally drops and the cooling assist is no longer required. The material can be re-soaked and wrung if needed. For children and elderly family members who are more vulnerable to heat stress, the same application applies with reduced concentration, 1 tablespoon per cup of water, to account for greater skin sensitivity. Always test a small area of skin before extended application, as a small percentage of people have sensitivity to ammonium compounds. If redness or irritation develops, discontinue immediately and use plain water evaporative cooling instead. Storage requires nothing beyond a sealed jar or Ziploc bag. Ammonium chloride does not expire, does not require refrigeration, and does not degrade in storage. A $3 purchase today provides cooling capability for years of potential heat emergencies. Here's what this channel will not do. It will not tell you that this replaces emergency medical care if someone is in heat stroke. Heat stroke, defined by confusion, loss of consciousness, or core body temperature above 104 degrees Fahrenheit, is a medical emergency. Get that person into the coolest available environment and call emergency services immediately. What this method addresses is heat stress prevention and early heat exhaustion management, the hours of thermal accumulation that precede the dangerous threshold. Used preventively, consistently, and correctly, endothermic cooling significantly reduces the risk of reaching the emergency threshold. It is not a treatment for the emergency itself. This channel also will not tell you that anyone claiming this method does not work has been paid to say so. That framing is too simple. Some people testing this improperly, wrong concentrations, inappropriate application sites, insufficient contact time, will get reduced results and reasonably conclude the method is unreliable. The method requires correct implementation, like every method. What this channel claims is that correct implementation consistently produces the results that 2 centuries of documented use have produced. Test it yourself. The $2 investment makes that test essentially free. Think about the summer of your childhood. If you grew up before widespread residential air conditioning, you remember hot nights with nothing but a window fan, wet sheets, and whatever your grandmother knew that helped. For millions of Americans over 60, that knowledge of wet sheets and cool cloths and the particular way a damp cloth on the neck could make a brutal August night bearable, that knowledge is not distant folklore. It is personal memory. What you may not have known then, what nobody told you then, was why that worked. It was not simply wetness, it was not simply evaporation, though evaporation contributed. It was the specific mineral content of the well water your grandmother used, water that in many regions carried naturally occurring dissolved mineral salts that enhanced the endothermic effect. Those farmhouses and rural homes were accidentally using the same chemistry that Harold Fitch carried across the Mojave in 1912. And when municipal water systems replaced well water, and when residential air conditioning was marketed as the modern replacement for traditional cooling knowledge, 2 things disappeared simultaneously: the mineral water and the understanding of why it worked. That is the story of the last 100 years. Not dramatic villainy, not mustache-twirling executives burning ancient manuscripts. Simply this: a profitable industry expanded, a traditional knowledge base contracted, and a generation grew up not knowing what their grandparents knew because nobody with a financial interest made sure they learned it. You are watching this video in 2024 because someone decided that cycle stops here. Because the information in railroad archives and military field manuals and medieval chemistry texts belongs to the people who need to stay cool in summer heat, not to the corporations charging them hundreds of dollars a month to do it. Because a $2 powder and a cup of water should never have been a secret. And now for you it no longer is. The Vault link is below. Share this with someone who pays too much to stay cool. The knowledge is free. Pass it on.